Hello, and welcome back to Spectacular Specimens. My name is Dr. Katherine O'Brien, and I work for the Museum of Biological Diversity. Each week, we pair specimens from our museum with books from the Grandview Heights Public Library. To check out the books, follow the links below this video in the description. This week, we're going to be talking about plants that you can find in your own backyard. And there are so many wonderful plants in Ohio, we're actually splitting this video into two different videos. In this first part, we're going to explore a state favorite, the Buckeye.
Hi, and welcome to my home office. My name is John Freudenstein, and I'm the head of the plant collection at the museum, the herbarium at The Ohio State University, and also a professor in the Department of Evolution, Ecology, and Organismal Biology. And today I want to talk to you about buckeyes. If you're from Ohio, you know that the buckeye is the state tree. But buckeyes are really interesting plants, just as the group that they are. They can range from being shrubs to small trees to relatively large trees. And they do a lot of interesting things with pollination as well. We have a number of them that are native here in the United States, and there are others that are native to the Old World as well. So to begin with, I'd like to take you out in the backyard and show you a couple that are right here on the property. And then we'll come back in and I'll talk to you a little bit more about the details of buckeyes. So let's go outside.
Here we are out in the backyard. It is a warm day in early July in Columbus. It's about 98 degrees. This is the backyard. You can see a large old beech tree. This is probably 150 years old. A great, completely hollow tree that you could just get inside of if you wanted to. But what I really want to show you here are a couple of other plants in particular. One of them is this shrub. This is what's called the bottlebrush buckeye, Aesculus parviflora. And you can tell why it's called that because the inflorescences or clusters of flowers really look like bottle brushes. They're getting a little bit past here because the weather is so warm, but you can see that the flowers don't really have much in the way of petals and sepals, the usual attractive parts of plants. They're mainly stamens, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a while. But if you look at the leaves here, you can see that they really are the typical buckeye shape. They're that what we call palmately divided leaf, sort of like a hand with the different segments that come off from a central point. And this is really a shrub. It's not a tree like a lot of our other buckeye species we may be familiar with. It only gets to about 4 or 5 feet in height, and it spreads out broadly like this. So it can be a popular plant for growing in a garden or other landscape sort of situation. Let's turn around the other way here and head toward the house. I'll show you another buckeye plant that's growing here. This is unfortunately not in bloom now because it was in bloom a little bit earlier this season, but this is the red buckeye, Aesculus pavia, from the southeastern United States. Again, if we look up close, we can see that the leaves are that typical palmately divided leaf, typical buckeye sort of morphology. And you'll notice here that they are already being infected by a sort of disease. This happens every year on this plant in this climate. I don't know whether it happens in the southeast where they're native, but here it's a real problem. These are not large trees. They don't get to be as large as the Ohio buckeye. It's a small tree, maybe 15 to 20 feet maximum. Here it's about 12 feet tall. But it makes a really nice flowering tree in the spring, especially when the red flowers are out. And I'll show you some of those details in a few minutes here. Okay, so those are the two things I wanted to show you in the backyard. Let's walk back here and head back for the house, and I will show you some things in detail about these plants. See you again back in the house.
First thing I want to share with you about buckeyes and sort of warn you about is you really don't want to eat any part of a buckeye plant. Not the fruit, not the seeds, the actual buckeye, not the leaves. They're all pretty toxic. There's one species, I'll be showing it to you in a couple of minutes here, that we have planted on our streets. It's native to Europe. We call it the horse chestnut, but it's really not a chestnut. Chestnuts, which are related to oaks, are actually edible. You can roast them, and they're not bad. They're a little bit bitter. But horse chestnuts are not chestnuts, and they have a buckeye fruit, which is toxic as well. Buckeyes are really more closely related to maples. They're actually in the same family, Sapindaceae, as maples are. So just don't go eating parts of buckeyes because it will not be good for you. Okay, so let's look at this species that we have on the screen right now. This is the Ohio buckeye. This is Aesculus glabra. This one's native in the middle part of the eastern states of the United States. It has, as you can see, yellow flowers that have stamens and the pistil sort of sticking out of the flower. Kind of small, slightly tubular flowers. And that ends up meaning for pollination that both bees and hummingbirds might want to visit it, because hummingbirds like a sort of tubular flower where they can put their beak in and pull out nectar. Okay, so this is the Ohio buckeye. This is one that is the state flower of Ohio. The next species I want to show you is that horse chestnut. This is Aesculus hippocastanum from Europe, from the eastern part of Europe, the Balkans, where it's a relatively rare plant now, but it's planted pretty widely in this country. And if you look at the flowers, you'll see they're white and fairly showy with a sort of red spot in the middle. And the stamens, again, are sticking out. And we would expect this one to also be pollinated by bees, maybe long-tongued bees that can stick their tongue into the flower. Look at this one now. This is another native species from the southeastern US. This is the red buckeye, Aesculus pavia. And this one has a clearly red flower, also rather tubular. If we look a little more closely at this one, we see the morphology. It really is kind of a narrowed morphology. So whatever is coming to pollinate it has to be able to stick its beak or its proboscis, its tongue, in there. And so this one really is keying in on hummingbirds. If you see one of these in flower in spring, you may find a swarm of hummingbirds around the tree, because this is the kind of flower that hummingbirds really go for. Now, the last species I want to show you is this bottle brush buckeye, and that's the one I showed you also out in the yard. But here it is again, and you can see that it doesn't really have much in the way of what we usually consider to be the showy parts of a flower. Petals and sepals, they're white for one thing, which is a little unusual. But most of what you really see are the stamens. Those are the male parts that are producing pollen, and they're sticking way out. And so here we expect that the pollinators are going to be something like, again, a hummingbird, because they have the long beaks that can get in there and get nectar, but also butterflies, because they have long probosces as well that can get in there. And it may be that hummingbirds actually transfer pollen by getting it on their wings. There are some plants that do this with butterflies. They get it on their wings instead of actually on the body, and then they just brush up against the next flower and transfer pollen that way. And so that may well be what's going on with this species, with the bottle brush buckeye. This is a pretty rare plant where it's native down in the southern part of the southeast US, down especially in Alabama. It's not common where you find it, and it is very much a different kind of growth form. It's a shrub instead of a tree, which is pretty unusual. These species, a few species, 6 really, that are native to North America, to the US, There are a couple more than I've shown you here that occur in the east, plus there's one species that occurs only on the west coast. And the rest of the species that make up the 13 of the total size of the genus are found in Asia. I just want to leave you with one last point about Buckeye, and that is, where did this name for the plant come from? Well, it really comes from the seed, or more specifically, the fruit. If you look at that fruit that we see in the autumn when the fruits fall and they crack open and the seed comes out, they're brown and they have a sort of white spot on one side. So you can imagine that looking like a shining deer's eye. And the lore tells us that colonists to North America looked at these seeds and thought, that looks like a deer's eye or a buckeye. And so that's where the name for this plant came from. So I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about buckeyes today. I've enjoyed being able to share this with you. Watch for them when you're out looking in nature, in natural settings, and think about them as well. When you go to the garden center, there may be something you want to plant in your own home garden. So thanks again for listening.
Thanks, John. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. You can also subscribe to make sure you don't miss any spectacular specimen videos. Make sure to tune back in on Friday to hear more about flowering plants you can find on your hikes in Ohio.